Each of the 3 heavy bombers made for the channel so far has had one major thing in common. Well, other than the fact that they've all got 4 engines, propellers, and were all ally aircraft. Each of the models I've built so far have had a electronics integration that allows them to run an engine start sequence, kind of a scale thing to the real aircraft. The first one you just saw was Texas Raiders. It was the first. It was very simple, purely an Arduino, powering TIP 120 transistors, and then powering 4 electric motors. It ran on a pulse width modulation kind of circuit. That's how they all work. I'll explain that in a second. Nice and easy. Memphis Belle on the screen here now. Very much not fully assembled. It made things a lot more complicated. I added sound to Memphis Belle. I vastly overcomplicated the way the sound was added. And I tried to make things more efficient and really just made things messier. The added boards added weight. The aircraft was relatively heavy. At least the model kit was relatively heavy. Lonesome Lola goes a step further in this development. I designed PCBs in order to simplify this, make it more compact, more efficient, try to co-locate as much as possible, and take up less footprint in the wings for the actual circuitry that was required to run this. Because it's really not that complex. The first board, at the top left there, underneath my left hand, it worked, but it was not going to work with the DF player that plays the sound. The footprint for the DF player on that board was too large, and therefore the DF player didn't fit. The second one, I corrected that on the bottom left, underneath my left hand now. It fit the DF player, but the TIP 120 transistors used for the pulse width modulation startup sequence stood vertically versus version 3 on the right, lower right side of the screen, which allowed the TIP 120 transistors to sit flat and nice and horizontal. Because of that, the second version was not going to work inside the wing. It was too tall with the addition of the TIP 120s, so when fully assembled, I couldn't close the upper and lower halves of the wings. This this design evolution is continuing. I'm not going to build another 4-engine bomber on the channel for a while. Spoiler alert. But I am planning to continue this evolution because Memphis Belle had a really bad weakness that I've kind of engineered out on Lola, but it is still there. And that weakness is that the combination of all the startup sequences with the sound in close proximity and using TIP 120 transistors, which are more amperage driven than they are voltage driven, causes a good amount of electromagnetic interference and a good amount of power fluctuation in the board. What does this manifest as? It manifests as this awful whining noise. So, with Lola, I managed to get rid of this, kind of, not really. I managed to minimize it. So, on Memphis Belle, I didn't really release the code for Memphis Belle, but I had tried to engineer out the whine. I did it by looking at the speed of the pulse width modulation. Again, I'll explain that in a second. So the final drive speed for the motors is what I focused in on, and I tried to just boost it because Texas Raiders did it too, but I wasn't really focused on the sound of Texas Raiders. So with Memphis Belle adding the actual engine startup sequence, or startup sound, excuse me, I wanted to make sure you could hear it. So I increased the power or the pulse width modulation duty cycle to the motors, and it did not fix it. It did not even fix it at all. So with Lola, I decided, all right, I'm going to minimize this. Once the engine has started, I'm going to command it to full speed. That transistor is no longer going to be in a fluctuating state. It's going to be wide open the whole time, full power to that motor. which, we're just going to be limited by drag on the propeller at that point, but the propellers will spin up and they'll go nice and fast. That got rid of the whine once the motor has kicked over and started. While it's doing its slow startup and build up, it still does whine, but it's not as bad. It's nowhere near as bad. Quick side note here. If you are missing a clear part in your kit, or like me didn't realize there is a clear part included because it's not in the instruction manual, microcrystal clear glue is fantastic for making clear parts. So for these landing light lenses, I did not realize they were included in the kit because they're not in the instructions. Or at least I didn't see them in the instructions. So I kind of made my own. But anyway, back to talking about electronics for a minute. So what is pulse width modulation? Here's your learning moment, as I've done in previous videos. If you think about like an LED light flashing on and off, you have a certain duty cycle of that light. So if over the course of a second, half of that time is spent on and half of that time is spent off, you have about a 50% duty cycle over the course of a second. Now, if you truncate the amount of time you're looking at, so if you take it down to 10 milliseconds, you can still have a 50% duty cycle, but now it's happening more quickly. This is actually how your LED dimmers work for LEDs in your house, for LEDs in various things. This is how it works, because your brain and your eye can only process this so quickly. And so for your LED dimmer, it's got whatever the time interval is for its duty cycle. I don't know it off the top of my head, and I'm not going to look it up because it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of this conversation. But it's going to flash on to full brightness for a certain proportion of time, and then it's going to be off. If you put a high-speed camera on one of your dimmed LED bulbs, you would actually be able to see this. It's also why model building has a really tricky issue with lights, and this is also why ring lights are great. Because if you use just a straight light, you can actually catch the flicker on camera, and I've had a couple of my videos historically that have caught it, and it's been a pain. So yeah, if you have a good camera that's capable of catching it, it will catch it at the worst times. You can also see it on like cell phone recordings of car headlights that are LEDs. You can see them flickering on and off. So anyway, we can do the same thing with electric motors. Over a certain time interval, we can turn the motor full on, and then we can turn the motor off. And depending on our ratio of on to off, we can control the speed of that motor. And so essentially what we're doing is modifying a pulse of power to it. And since we're looking at it over time, we've got a graph, so we are controlling the width of that pulse. We get pulse width modulation. So there's your little factoid, your little learning moment, or 2 minutes, I guess, probably. Anyway, we'll continue. The landing gear for the kit looks really good. It went together very well. You just have to be careful not to trim off like the locating pins. I think I did that on one part, realized it, and didn't do it a second time. I also used a Vallejo tire black for the tires this time, and I tried to thin out some Tamiya light gray to get some weathering patterns on the tires, and I think ultimately it came out looking really good. It looks a little bit out of place with the model unpainted, but since I can look to the left right now and see the finished model, and I can see it, I'm going to tell you, it looks good. We're not going to argue with that. Looking at you, person who's trying to type right now. I'm looking at you. Anyway, the flaps have possible aftermarket solutions that you can purchase for this kit. I did not. In hindsight, I think it might have been a good idea. Depends how you want to display your model, honestly. It does come with the flap drive mechanism and the supports to prevent buffeting in the flaps, but ultimately, I think it looks fine out of the kit. It probably would have added a little bit to it. It's one of those nitpicky things, right? So it's entirely up to you what you want to do. If I were going to edit or add this model to a competition or enter it into a competition, that's the word I'm looking for, which I almost did, it probably would be that extra sauce that would make it stand out a little bit more. But since mine starts up and plays engine noises, I think I got enough of that already. Before you put your canopies on this model, it is very important to paint the area that I'm painting on screen now. If you don't, you're going to end up with a giant piece of acreage at the front of the aircraft that's just a nice gray color, the same color as the regular kit plastic. So, yeah, don't do that. Be careful. The next episode is going to focus heavily on paint because there's quite a lot of painting to do. The Lancaster's got a really neat camouflage pattern. I really like it, and I'm excited to show all of you what I did. So, if you've hung out with me this far and you've learned about pulse width modulation, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and put a factoid in the comments. I think that'd be great. I was going to explain more about the landing gear of the aircraft. I may have to do that another time. I've sat through a technical briefing on the landing gear of the Lancaster, and it's really cool. Like, it's really cool. Oh, and remember in the other episode when I told you that we were putting on the big glass for the bombardier position? There it is. Thank you to the Patreons. Thank you to all of you that are still here. Catch you in the next one. We're going to paint this sucker.